The sheriff asked if I wanted to press charges. I looked at Merritt Ashworth standing in handcuffs, her light blue suit wrinkled, mascara running down her cheeks. 12 years she ruled this valley. 12 years later, she destroyed families who wouldn't bow. And now she was begging me, the man she called a trespasser, a squatter, a nobody, to show mercy. But here's the thing about mercy. You don't get to ask for what you never gave. Stick around. The axe came down. Wood split clean. The smell of fresh pine filled the morning air, sharp and honest, the way everything used to be before the trouble started. I set the split log onto the pile and wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my calloused hand. Calluses earned over 15 years of building, tearing down, rebuilding. The cabin behind me wasn't an architectural masterpiece. It was something better. It was proof of patience. Every beam I'd cut myself. Every foundation stone I'd hauled with my own 2 hands. The walls knew my sweat. The floor knew my footsteps. This place wasn't just a shelter. It was testimony. Coffee steamed on the porch railing, waiting for me. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge yet, and the valley below lay wrapped in morning mist like a secret the mountains weren't ready to share. I'd chosen this spot 15 years ago for exactly this view, for the quiet, for the distance from everything that didn't matter. Then the engine sound ripped through the silence. I didn't turn around right away. I'd learned a long time ago that rushing toward trouble only makes it arrive faster, so I listened. Tires on gravel, slow, deliberate. The crunch of frost-stiff dirt. Then the unmistakable whoop of a siren, just once, more announcement than emergency. When I finally turned, red and blue lights were painting the log walls of my cabin in alternating accusations. A sheriff's cruiser had climbed my private road and stopped just short of the hand-built gate I'd installed 5 years back. Deputy Harlan Truitt stepped out first, hat in hand, wearing an expression that said he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. The passenger door opened next. Merritt Ashworth emerged like she was stepping onto a stage. Light blue suit, sharp enough to cut. High heels that had no business on mountain terrain. Sunglasses covering half her face. Completely unnecessary at 6 in the morning. But that was Merritt. Everything about her was performance. She surveyed my cabin the way a health inspector surveys a restaurant they've already decided to shut down. Her finger rose, pointing directly at my front door. This structure is an illegal construction on HOA property. Sheriff, I want this man removed immediately. I didn't move, didn't react. Just lifted my coffee cup and took a slow sip, watching her over the rim. Harlan cleared his throat. Shepard, I apologize for the early visit. We received a 911 call reporting a land use violation. Technically, I'm required to respond. Technically, I repeated. That's a careful word. His eyes flickered toward Merritt, then back to me, just doing what I'm required to do. Then do it. I gestured toward the property with my cup. Look around, but be careful not to let her wander onto land that isn't hers. Merritt's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to being dismissed. In this valley, people didn't dismiss Merritt Ashworth. They apologized to her. They accommodated her. They bent. I'd never been good at bending. Mr. Calhoun, she said, stepping closer despite the mud threatening her designer heels. The HOA board approved a boundary adjustment last month. Your cabin sits 200 feet inside our scenic preservation zone. You can either demolish it voluntarily, or we will do it for you. I set down my coffee, stepped off the porch. I walked past her without a word until I reached the wooden marker post I'd driven into the ground 5 years ago. My hand rested on its weathered top. This marker, I said, is based on the original Valley Survey, registered with the county in 1974. Want to see the documentation? Old surveys don't matter. The HOA has updated. Updated based on what? I turned to face her. Who was the surveyor? Who signed? Who stamped it at the county office? Silence. Her sunglasses slipped down just enough for me to see the flash of uncertainty in her eyes. It lasted less than a second, but I caught it. She hadn't expected questions. She'd expected compliance. Harlan shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Merit, boundary adjustments require owner notification. Did Mr. Calhoun receive certified mail? That's an administrative matter, she snapped. Sheriff, I need you to do your job. My job, Harlan said slowly, is to respond to legitimate complaints. So far, all I see is a man standing on his own porch, drinking coffee. Merritt's composure cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but visible. She stepped toward me, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Expensive, aggressive, designed to intimidate. Mr. Calhoun, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I don't know where you came from or what you think you're doing here, but I've run this valley for 12 years. Men more stubborn than you have learned to fall in line, or they've learned to disappear. I met her gaze without blinking. I've never been good at falling in line. Then you'll learn. She stepped back, composure restored like a mask snapping into place. You have 30 days. After that, I will personally supervise the demolition. She returned to the cruiser, heels stabbing the gravel with each step. Harlan lingered a moment longer, his expression apologetic. Shepard, I don't know what she's planning, but watch yourself. Something doesn't smell right. I know, I said. Thanks for the warning. He tipped his hat and climbed back into the cruiser. The vehicle reversed down my drive, red and blue lights fading into the morning mist. Within minutes, the valley was quiet again. But the silence felt different now, charged, waiting. I stood there, watching the dust settle, and thought about what Merritt didn't know. She didn't know who I was, didn't know what I'd built over 15 years of patient, invisible work. Didn't know that every thread of her carefully constructed life, every paycheck, every mortgage payment, every drop of water flowing through her faucets, was connected to me. She'd just called the police on a man who owned everything around her, and she had absolutely no idea. The first call I made was to Eulalia Crane. She picked up on the second ring, her voice sharp and awake despite the hour. Shepard Calhoun called before 7 a.m. Someone must have made a serious mistake. Merritt Ashworth, HOA president, claims there's a new boundary map that puts my cabin on her territory. Ashworth. I could hear Eulalia typing already. Whispering Pines HOA. I know the name. She's been consolidating power in that valley for over a decade. She brought the sheriff this morning. Threatened demolition within 30 days. Bold move. A pause. Also stupid. Boundary adjustments require owner consent and county certification. If she's claiming otherwise, she's either lying or someone forged the paperwork. That's what I need you to find out. I'll send Corbin ahead. If there's dirty money flowing through this, he'll trace it. Another pause, longer this time. Shepard, how deep do you want to go? All the way. Good, because if Merritt Ashworth is playing the games I think she's playing, we're going to need every piece of evidence we can find. I ended the call and looked out over the valley. Morning light had burned off the mist, revealing the patchwork of properties below. Small ranches, modest homes, families who'd lived here for generations. They had no idea what was happening. No idea that someone was redrawing the lines beneath their feet. But they would. Soon enough. Corbin Whitmore arrived around noon, driving the same beat-up Honda Civic he'd owned for 8 years. The car was a deliberate camouflage. Nothing about it suggested that the man behind the wheel could trace financial transactions through 10 layers of shell companies with the precision of a surgeon. He parked beside my cabin and stepped out, laptop bag over his shoulder, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. "Nice place," he said, scanning the property. "Remote. Good sightlines. Hard to approach without being seen." "That's the point." He followed me inside, setting up his laptop on my kitchen table. Within minutes, he was deep into county records, corporate filings, and property databases that most people didn't know existed. "Found your boundary map," he said after 20 minutes. "Submitted last month by a consulting firm called Ridgeline Associates." "Never heard of them." "You wouldn't have. They're registered in Nevada, which means minimal disclosure requirements." His fingers danced across the keyboard. "But here's where it gets interesting. Ridgeline Associates is 60% owned by a holding company called Vance Development Group." "Vance?" "Thackeray Vance, local developer. Big reputation in real estate circles. Bigger reputation for making problems disappear when they stand in his way." Corbin turned the laptop to face me. "He bought 200 acres on the south end of this valley 6 months ago. Paid about 40% below market value." "How does someone manage that?" "By convincing sellers they have no choice." Corbin's expression darkened. "This isn't just an HOA dispute, Shepard. This is a coordinated land acquisition scheme. Merritt Ashworth isn't acting alone. She's the front. Thackeray Vance is the money." I sat back, processing. The valley I'd chosen for its peace was being dismantled piece by piece, family by family, all hidden behind paperwork and bureaucratic pressure. "What do they want with my ridge?" Corbin pulled up a topographical map. "Your property sits on the only stable bedrock in the northern valley. Everything below is ancient seabed, won't support anything taller than 2 stories. But up here?" He tapped the screen. "You could build a 50-room resort without breaking a sweat." "A resort?" "That's my guess. Thackeray's been pitching something called the Whispering Pines Mountain Experience to investors for 2 years. The only thing missing from his proposal is suitable construction ground." Corbin looked at me. "Your ground." The picture was becoming clearer. Merritt's threats, the fraudulent boundary map, the morning visit with the sheriff, all chess moves designed to pressure me off land I'd never agreed to sell. "Keep digging," I said. "I want to know every company Thackeray touches, every payment Merritt receives, every connection between them." "That's a lot of ground to cover." "I've got time, and I've got patience." Corbin nodded, turning back to his laptop. "Then let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes." The answer came faster than either of us expected. That evening, Winslow Draper pulled his ancient pickup truck into my drive. Winslow had ranched in this valley for 40 years. His family had been here even longer. If anyone knew the hidden currents flowing beneath the surface, it was him. He climbed out slowly, the way old ranchers do when their knees have seen too many winters. His eyes swept across my property with the appreciation of a man who understood what it meant to build something with your own hands. "Heard you had visitors this morning," he said. "Word travels fast. In valleys like this, word is all we've got." He leaned against his truck, arms folded. "Merritt Ashworth's been busy lately. 6 families have sold their land in the past 2 years, all below market, all after receiving citations, fines, complaints they couldn't fight. Who's buying? Different names each time, but Corbin will tell you, they all trace back to the same place. Thackeray Vance. Winslow nodded slowly. Man's got ambition, and money, and no conscience to speak of. He paused, eyes meeting mine. You're different from the others, Shepard. You've got resources they didn't have. Connections. The question is whether you're willing to use them. I'm willing. Good. He straightened up, preparing to leave. Because this valley needs someone who can fight back. We've been losing ground for too long. Literally. A bitter laugh. Most folks don't even realize they're being squeezed until it's too late. They'll realize soon, I said. I'll make sure of it. Winslow climbed back into his truck, engine coughing to life. Before he pulled away, he leaned out the window. One more thing. Merritt thinks she's untouchable. 12 years of getting her way does that to a person. But nobody's untouchable, Shepard. Nobody. The truck disappeared down the drive, leaving dust hanging in the golden evening light. I stood there for a long moment, thinking about untouchable people, about the arrogance that comes from too much power held too long, about how that arrogance always, eventually, becomes the crack that brings the whole structure down. The harassment began 2 days later. First came the inspectors. 2 men in matching khaki vests with HOA compliance badges arrived at 7:30 a.m., tablets in hand, photographing everything on my property like crime scene investigators. Section 4.7 violation, one of them announced, pointing at my woodpile. Unapproved storage structure. It's firewood, I said, for heating. Doesn't matter, citation issued. They photographed my solar panels, my rainwater collection tank, the tool shed I'd built 3 years ago. Everything became a violation. Everything became documentation. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I just watched, memorizing their faces, their badge numbers, the registration plate on their HOA vehicle. When they finally left, I sent every detail to Eulalia. 3 days later, a drone appeared. It circled my cabin at 7 a.m., camera lens catching the morning light. I photographed it right back, capturing its registration number. HOA rental, documented and filed. 5 days after that, an email arrived citing me for quiet hours violations. Chainsaw operation before 9 a.m. Attached was a photograph of me splitting wood at dawn, taken from behind my cabin, deep in the tree line. Someone had trespassed onto my property before sunrise, hidden in the shadows. Waited. Watched. The anger that rose in my chest was cold and precise, not the kind that makes you shout, the kind that makes you plan. I hiked to the spot where the photograph must have been taken, found the flattened pine needles where someone had crouched, found a cigarette butt, a brand I didn't smoke, found the faint impression of a boot heel in soft dirt. I photographed everything, logged the coordinates, set up additional trail cameras covering every approach. If they wanted to play surveillance games, I would show them what real surveillance looked like. The anonymous letter appeared on my gate 7 days after the first inspection. Plain paper. No signature. No letterhead. Just words. Comply or face consequences. This is your final warning. I took a photo, added it to the file, and felt something shift inside me. Not fear, but recognition. I'd seen this pattern before. The slow squeeze, the escalating pressure, the isolation of a target until they break. But I'd spent 15 years learning patience. 15 years building something they couldn't see. They thought I was alone on this ridge, vulnerable, easy to push. They had no idea who they were pushing. The community started reaching out within days. First Elena, a retired school teacher, whose small garden had been cited for agricultural violations. Then Tom, a quiet man whose family had ranched in the valley for 3 generations, until 4 consecutive citations forced him to sell at a loss. Then Lydia, who'd received threatening phone calls in the middle of the night. Each story was different. Each story was the same. Merritt Ashworth and her HOA had spent 12 years systematically pressuring families off their land. Anyone who resisted faced fines, inspections, legal threats. Anyone who complained found their complaints buried in bureaucratic quicksand. "She thinks she's untouchable," Elena said, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee she'd brought herself. "After so many years, she believes no one can stop her." "Everyone can be stopped," I said. "You just have to find the right lever." Tom shook his head. "People have tried. They hire lawyers, file complaints. Nothing works. She has connections in the county, friends in the right offices. Then we don't fight in those offices." I leaned forward. "We find where her connections don't reach." They looked at me with the desperate hope of people who'd been losing for too long. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself once before I learned that power isn't about strength. It's about information, about leverage, about patience. "Give me time," I said, "and trust me. This isn't over yet." The trail cameras changed everything. At 2:47 a.m., 2 weeks after Merritt's first visit, motion sensors triggered across my northern perimeter. I watched the footage at dawn, coffee growing cold beside me. 3 figures moved through the tree line. No flashlights, no headlamps. They navigated by moonlight alone, footsteps careful and practiced. Professional. The first man carried a toolbox. The second held a bundle of orange survey stakes, commercial grade, the kind used for construction sites. The third walked with the confident stride of someone who owned whatever ground he stood on. I froze the frame, enhanced the image. Even in the grainy night vision, I recognized the silhouette, the square jaw, the expensive watch catching a glint of moonlight. Thackeray Vance himself, on my property, at nearly 3 in the morning, planting stakes. I played the footage forward. They stopped 50 yards from my cabin, working quickly, efficiently, stakes driven into ground that didn't belong to them, establishing possession before any permit existed, creating facts on the ground that paperwork could follow later. When they finished, they disappeared back into the trees like ghosts. I sent the footage to Eulalia with a single line, "We have them." Her response came within minutes. "Don't confront. Document. This proves premeditated encroachment, criminal trespass. We're building something bigger than a boundary dispute." Corbin called an hour later. His voice was tight with the excitement of someone who'd found exactly what he was looking for. "Shepard, I traced the money, all of it, and it's worse than we thought." "Tell me." Thackeray Vance took out a $40 million loan from a bank in Nevada to finance his resort project. You know what he used as collateral? His own property? Better. He pledged the land use rights of the entire Whispering Pines community. 200 homes. None of the owners know. If the loan defaults, the bank doesn't take Thackeray's assets. They take everyone else's. I felt the weight of that settle into my chest. 200 families. 200 homes. All leveraged without knowledge or consent. all balanced on the decisions of a man who'd built his empire on deception. And Merritt? Merritt Ashworth has received $1.8 million over 12 years from a company called Valley Management Solutions. Guess who owns it? Thackeray. Exactly right. She's not the HOA president. She's an employee, paid to clear the way for whatever Thackeray wants. Corbin paused. But here's the thing that really matters. All those shell companies, all those transactions, all those dirty deals, they all connect to property in this valley. Property that someone else actually owns. What do you mean? I mean the original land deeds, the watershed rights, the infrastructure easements. They were never properly transferred when the subdivision was built. Technically, legally, someone else still holds the underlying rights to almost everything Thackeray thinks he controls. My chest tightened. Who? That's the question, isn't it? Corbin's voice held a note I couldn't quite identify. The records go back to a purchase in 2010. A single buyer who acquired the original valley parcel for almost nothing, back when this was all undeveloped wilderness. I knew what he was going to say before he said it. The buyer's name is Shepard Thomas Calhoun. Silence stretched between us. You knew, Corbin said finally. You've known all along. I knew what I owned. I didn't know anyone would try to build a criminal empire on top of it. So all this time, the harassment, the threats, the fraudulent maps, they've been targeting the one person who actually holds all the cards. I looked out the window at the ridge Merritt Ashworth wanted so badly. The ridge I'd bought 15 years ago with money I'd earned rebuilding engines and flipping foreclosures. The ridge where I'd scattered my father's ashes and promised to build the home he'd always dreamed of. They thought I was a squatter, a trespasser, a nobody to be pushed aside. They had absolutely no idea. There's more, I said to Corbin. Things I haven't told anyone. Like what? Like the fact that I don't just own the land. I own the water utility that serves the entire community, the management company that processes HOA paperwork, the holding company that backs the credit union where Merritt Ashworth has her mortgage. Silence again. Longer this time. You're serious? 15 years, Corbin. That's a long time to build quietly. A long time to acquire pieces no one was paying attention to. I never planned to use any of it. I just wanted to be left alone. But now? I watched the morning light spread across my valley, in ways Merritt Ashworth couldn't begin to imagine. Now, I said, someone made the mistake of not leaving me alone. The investigation accelerated after that. Eulalia assembled the legal framework. Corbin traced every dollar. Winslow gathered testimonies from families who'd been pressured, threatened, pushed out of homes they'd occupied for generations. The pattern was damning. Merritt Ashworth had spent 12 years weaponizing the HOA to serve Thackeray Vance's interests. Citations for imaginary violations. Fines that doubled and tripled until families couldn't afford to stay. Anonymous complaints that triggered inspections designed to find problems where none existed. 30 families had sold below market value. $4.2 million had flowed through shell companies. And at the center of it all sat two people who believed they were untouchable. Delphine Morse appeared at my cabin 11 days before everything changed. She came after midnight, driving with her headlights off, hands shaking as she knocked on my door. I've been Merritt's secretary for 8 years, she said, standing in my kitchen like a woman confessing sins. I've seen everything. The emails, the meeting minutes, the lists of who to target next. She held out a USB drive. I have copies of all of it. Why now? Her eyes glistened. Because I can't sleep anymore. Because every family she destroys, I helped her do it. Because I'm tired of being afraid of someone who treats people like obstacles to be removed. I took the drive. This is going to change things. For everyone. I know. She wiped her eyes. That's why I'm here. The files on that drive were devastating. Email chains between Merritt and Thackeray discussing which families to pressure next. Meeting minutes showing board votes that never actually happened. And most damning of all, evidence that 12 signatures on the boundary amendment had been forged. 3 of those signatures belonged to homeowners who had died before the document was created. They were signing papers in the names of the deceased. Federal fraud, Eulalia said when I showed her. Wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. This isn't just a civil matter anymore. This is criminal. Sheriff Harlan Truitt arrived at my cabin the next evening, off duty, driving his personal truck. Heard there's going to be a community meeting, he said. Word travels fast. In valleys like this. He looked around, making sure we were alone. I've watched Merritt Ashworth operate for 12 years. I've seen the complaints that get buried, the investigations that go nowhere, the families that give up and leave. Why didn't you stop it? Because I couldn't prove anything. Because she has friends in places I can't reach. Because every time I tried to dig, someone shut it down. He met my eyes. But if someone else were to dig, someone with resources I don't have, I'd be grateful. Would you be willing to act on what they found? If the evidence is solid, I'd be more than willing. A pause. I'd be honored. After he left, I stood on my porch watching the stars emerge over the valley. 12 years of corruption. 12 years of families pushed off their land. 12 years of a woman who thought she was untouchable. That was about to end. Thackeray Vance appeared at the bottom of my drive 2 days later, leaning against a black Mercedes with a smile that had closed 1,000 deals. "Mr. Calhoun," he called out as I approached. "We should talk." About what? About mutual interests, about the future of this valley, about opportunities that could benefit us both. I'm listening. He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. $1 million. Cash transfer. You take it, you walk away, and we never have this conversation again. I didn't touch the envelope. That's a lot of money for a piece of land you've already tried to steal. His smile flickered. Steal is a strong word. Forge is another strong word. So is fraud. So is conspiracy. The smile died completely. You don't know what you're dealing with, Calhoun. I've been building this project for years. I have investors. I have commitments. I have people who don't take kindly to obstacles. I'm sure you do. So take the money. Be smart. Before this gets unpleasant. I stepped closer. Close enough to see the calculation behind his eyes. Close enough to make sure he remembered this moment. You want to know the difference between you and me, Thackeray? You think money can buy anything. I know there are things money can't touch. He stared at me for a long moment. Whatever he saw in my face made him put the envelope back in his jacket. You'll regret this, he said quietly. Maybe, but not as much as you will. He drove away without another word. I watched the Mercedes disappear around the bend and felt something settle into place inside my chest. The game was almost over. The final moves were approaching, and Merritt Ashworth still had no idea whose cabin she had tried to demolish. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for Saturday at noon. Merritt had sent notices to every resident. Mandatory attendance, development updates, community future. She thought it was her moment of triumph. She thought she was about to announce the beginning of her victory. She had no idea it was the beginning of her end. Saturday arrived with the kind of cloudless sky that makes everything feel possible. I dressed simply. Work boots, jeans, the same flannel shirt I'd worn the day Merritt first showed up at my cabin. No suit. No tie. I wanted her to see exactly who she'd underestimated. Eulalia met me at the bottom of the drive, her briefcase heavy with documents that would change everything. Corbin sat in the passenger seat, laptop ready, projector cables coiled in his bag. Sheriff Harlan Truitt followed in his cruiser, lights off, official capacity. "Ready?" Eulalia asked. 15 years ready. We drove toward Whispering Pines Lodge in convoy. The building sat at the valley's center, a timber frame structure the HOA used for meetings, weddings, and community events. Today, it would host something none of them expected. The parking lot was already full when we arrived. 200 chairs had been arranged inside, and nearly every seat was occupied. Families who'd been harassed, neighbors who'd been fined, people who'd lost homes and people still fighting to keep them. They'd come because Merritt demanded it. They had no idea what they were about to witness. Merritt sat at the front table, light blue suit immaculate, platinum hair swept back like a crown. Thackeray Vance occupied the chair beside her, fingers steepled, radiating the confidence of a man who'd never lost. Behind them, a projection screen displayed the HOA logo alongside the words, "Whispering Pines, building tomorrow together." Building tomorrow on stolen land, on forged signatures, on the backs of families who'd trusted their community. Not anymore. Merritt struck her gavel against the table, and the murmuring crowd fell silent. "Thank you all for attending," she began, voice carrying the practiced warmth of a politician at a fundraiser. "Today marks an important milestone for Whispering Pines. After years of careful planning, we're ready to announce a development initiative that will transform our community into something truly special." She gestured toward the screen, where a rendering appeared, a sprawling resort complex perched on a familiar ridge. My ridge. My cabin, conspicuously absent from the image. The Whispering Pines mountain experience will bring jobs, tourism, and prosperity to our valley. Some sacrifices will be necessary, of course. Some properties will need to be relocated. But progress always requires change. The back doors opened. Every head turned as I walked down the center aisle. Eulalia on my left, Corbin on my right, Sheriff Harlan behind us. The whispers started immediately. Confusion, recognition, alarm. Merritt's smile froze. "Mr. Calhoun." Her voice sharpened. "This is a closed HOA meeting. You're not a member." "No," I agreed, continuing toward the front. "But I am a landowner, and I have information this community deserves to hear. Whatever grievances you have can be addressed through proper channels. The proper channels are why we're here." I stopped at the foot of the stage, facing the crowd. "Everything you've been told about this development is built on lies, and I can prove it." Thackeray rose from his chair. "This is harassment. Sheriff, remove this man." Harlan stepped forward, but not toward me, toward Thackeray. "Actually, Mr. Vance, I'm here in an official capacity. These individuals have presented evidence of potential crimes. I'm required to allow them to speak." The blood drained from Thackeray's face. Merritt gripped the table edge, knuckles whitening. Eulalia approached the projection screen, connecting Corbin's laptop with practiced efficiency. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "my name is Eulalia Crane. I'm an attorney specializing in land law, and I've spent the past 3 weeks investigating irregularities in your HOA's recent boundary adjustments. The resort rendering disappeared, replaced by a document scan. This is the boundary amendment your board approved last month. It purports to carry 47 resident signatures authorizing changes to community property lines. She advanced to the next slide. 12 of these signatures are forgeries. 3 of them belong to homeowners who passed away before this document was created. Gasps erupted throughout the room. Someone shouted. Someone else began to cry. Merritt slammed her palm against the table. This is slander. These accusations are completely— The county clerk has already confirmed the forgeries, Eulalia interrupted. Federal investigators have been notified. This isn't slander, Ms. Ashworth. This is evidence. Corbin took over, advancing to a new slide. A flowchart of interconnected companies, money flows, ownership structures. For 12 years, Merritt Ashworth has received payments totaling $1.8 million from a company called Valley Management Solutions. This company is wholly owned by Thackeray Vance. He pointed to the connections on screen. Miss Ashworth isn't your HOA president. She's a paid employee, serving Mr. Vance's interests while pretending to serve yours. The room erupted. Shouts of anger, demands for explanation. Merritt tried to speak, but her voice was drowned in the chaos. I raised my hand and somehow, the crowd quieted. They were looking at me now, waiting. There's more, I said, and it affects every single person in this room. The next slide showed loan documents, bank records, property assessments. Thackeray Vance borrowed $40 million to finance his resort project. The collateral for that loan wasn't his own property. It was yours. Every home in Whispering Pines has been pledged against a debt none of you knew existed. If his project fails, the bank doesn't take his assets. They take your homes. Silence. The kind that comes before a storm breaks. Then Tom stood up. Tom, who'd been forced to sell his family's land at a fraction of its value. Tom, who'd attended every HOA meeting for 20 years, trusting that his neighbors were looking out for each other. You mortgaged my home? His voice cracked. Without asking? Without telling me? Merritt's composure finally shattered. You don't understand. The development would have made everyone wealthy. Property values would have made you wealthy, Elena shouted from across the room. You fined me $2,000 for growing tomatoes. You told me it was for the community. It was for him. The accusations came faster now, overlapping, building. 12 years of suppressed anger finally finding a voice. 12 years of families pushed out, pressured, broken. All because 2 people decided their ambitions mattered more than anyone else's home. I let the chaos continue for exactly as long as it needed to. Then I stepped onto the stage. Merritt, I said, and something in my tone cut through the noise. You came to my cabin 3 weeks ago. You called me a trespasser. You said my land belonged to your HOA. She stared at me, mascara beginning to run, the composed mask crumbling into something raw and desperate. Do you know who actually owns Whispering Pines? The HOA owns the common areas. The residents own their lots. That's how it's always wrong. I reached into my jacket and withdrew a document I'd carried for 15 years. This is the original land deed for this valley. Purchased in 2010, when everything here was undeveloped wilderness. The buyer acquired full rights: surface, subsurface, watershed, and infrastructure easements. I held it up so everyone could see. The buyer's name is Shepard Thomas Calhoun. Merritt's mouth opened, closed. It opened again. No sound came out. But that's not all. I stepped closer. The water utility implies they control the supply? Wrong. I own the senior water rights for this entire aquifer. Legally, every drop flowing through those pipes belongs to me before it even enters their system. And the credit union building where your office sits, Merritt? You lease that space. Guess who bought the ground lease last week when your landlord panicked? Technically, I'm your landlord now, and your lease just expired. She stumbled backward. And the management company your HOA contracts for administrative services? Valley Administrative Services. I own 51%. I let the silence stretch. Let every word sink in. You called the police on a man who owns everything around you. You threatened someone who controls the water flowing through your pipes, the bank holding your debt, the company processing your paperwork. I met her eyes. Merritt Ashworth, you don't just stand on my land. You live a life that runs through my hands. She collapsed into her chair like a marionette with cut strings. Thackeray lunged for the exit, but 3 residents blocked his path. He wasn't going anywhere. Sheriff Harlan stepped forward, handcuffs catching the light. Merritt Ashworth, Thackeray Vance, you're under arrest for real estate fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit property theft. You have the right to remain silent. The click of handcuffs echoed through the silent room. Merritt's light blue suit wrinkled as deputies guided her arms behind her back. Mascara traced dark lines down her cheeks. 12 years of terror. 12 years of families destroyed. And it ended not with violence, but with truth. The crowd began to applaud. Slowly at first, then building into something thunderous. Families who'd lost everything. Neighbors who'd lived in fear. People who'd been told they were powerless discovered that power can shift in an instant. I didn't applaud. I watched Merritt being led away, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfied. Not triumph. Relief. The legal consequences fell like dominoes. Merritt Ashworth faced 14 counts of forgery, 6 counts of fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy. Bail was set at $2 million. Thackeray Vance faced 22 counts of securities fraud, 8 counts of bank fraud, and pending RICO charges. No bail. The fraudulent boundary map was nullified. Every citation issued under false pretenses was voided. $340,000 in illegally collected fines would be refunded to the families who'd paid them. Tom's family land, the property he'd been forced to sell, I purchased from the shell company that held it and transferred the deed back to him. No charge, no strings, no just a wrong made right. The HOA itself was dissolved pending reorganization. Whatever replaced it would be built on transparency, accountability, and actual community consent. Delphine Morse, the secretary who'd risked everything to bring evidence, was offered a position managing the transition. She accepted with tears in her eyes. I should have spoken sooner, she said. You spoke when it mattered. That's what counts. Eulalia called me a week after the arrests. Shepard, I need to ask you something. With everything you own, the land, the utilities, the infrastructure, you could control this entire valley. Every decision, every development, every future. I know. So what are you going to do? I'd thought about that question every day since the meeting. Power is seductive. Control is addictive. I'd watched Merritt and Thackeray prove that truth over 12 years of corruption. But I'd also watched my father work himself to exhaustion for a dream he never achieved. A home in the mountains. A place where community meant something. A valley where neighbors looked out for each other instead of preying on each other. I'm going to let it go, I said. The Calhoun Valley Community Trust was established on a Tuesday morning, signed into existence in the same lodge where Merritt had tried to announce her stolen triumph. The documents transferred watershed rights, infrastructure control, and land use authority into a trust governed by an elected board of residents. I kept the cabin, kept the ridge where my father's ashes rested, kept enough to live simply, quietly, the way I'd always intended. Everything else belonged to the valley now. Winslow Draper found me on my porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "You gave it all away," he said. "I gave it back. Most men would have held on. I used it. Build something for themselves. Most men don't understand that power without purpose is just another kind of prison." I sipped my coffee. My father taught me that. It took me a long time to understand what he meant. Winslow sat down beside me, two old ranchers watching the day end. "What happens now?" "Now the valley decides its own future. Elections, votes, accountability, all the things Merritt tried to destroy." "And you?" I looked at my cabin, at the wood I'd split, at the land I'd protected, at the home my father had always dreamed of. "I'm going to sit right here, watch the seasons change, maybe finally read all those books I've been collecting." Winslow laughed. "Sounds boring. Sounds perfect." The months that followed proved him wrong about the boring part. The community trust held its first elections. New leadership emerged. Elena, Tom, others who'd survived the Ashworth years. They implemented transparency requirements that would have made Merritt's schemes impossible. Property values stabilized. Families who'd fled returned. The valley began to heal. I watched from my ridge, participating when asked, advising when needed, but mostly staying out of the way. The valley didn't need a savior. It needed space to become what it had always wanted to be. Merritt Ashworth pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testimony against Thackeray Vance. She received 8 years. Thackeray, who refused any deal, was convicted on all counts. 18 years, no parole. I didn't attend either sentencing. I'd seen enough of both of them to last a lifetime. On the 1-year anniversary of the HOA meeting, the community held a celebration at the lodge. Music, food, neighbors who'd become friends. They invited me to speak, and I almost declined. But some things need to be said. I stood before the same crowd that had witnessed Merritt's downfall, looking at faces transformed by a year of freedom. "A year ago," I said, "this valley was held hostage by 2 people who believed their ambitions mattered more than your homes. They thought power meant control. They thought money meant invincibility. They were wrong." I looked at Tom standing with his family on land they'd almost lost forever. At Elena, whose garden had become the community's pride. At Delphine, who'd found courage when courage was hardest. Power isn't control. It's my responsibility. Money isn't strength. It's a tool. And a community isn't a collection of properties. It's people who choose to trust each other, protect each other, and build something together. I raised my coffee cup, the same cup I'd been holding when Merritt first arrived at my cabin. "To Whispering Pines. May it always belong to the people who call it home." The applause that followed wasn't for me. It was for everyone who'd survived, everyone who'd fought, everyone who'd refused to disappear. That night, I walked back to my cabin under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The valley spread below me, lights flickering in windows, families settling into homes they no longer feared losing. I thought about Merritt Ashworth in her cell, about Thackeray Vance facing 18 years of consequences, About the morning she'd pointed at my cabin and demanded its destruction. She'd called me a trespasser, a squatter, nobody. She'd had no idea that nobody owned everything, that the squatter held all the cards, that the trespasser was the only one who actually belonged. The irony still made me smile. I settled onto my porch, boots on the railing, coffee warming my hands. No sirens, no drones, no threatening letters. Just whined through the pines and the distant sound of the creek I'd protected without anyone knowing. Merritt believed power meant dominion. Thackeray believed wealth meant immunity. But they forgot the oldest truth. Everything built on lies collapses when the truth finally speaks. And the truth always speaks, eventually, inevitably, completely. She called the police because she thought I was trespassing on her territory. In the end, she was the one led away in handcuffs, standing on land she never owned, destroyed by the man she'd dismissed as nothing. Sometimes justice doesn't wait for another lifetime. Sometimes it arrives exactly when it's needed. Wearing work boots and drinking coffee on a porch, it was built with its own hands. The valley was quiet now, peaceful, free, and I was finally home. If this story reminded you why truth matters, hit like. Subscribe for more justice. And if you want to show extra support, the thanks button is right below. Thank you for staying until the end. More stories are waiting down the trail. See you next time.